This chart shows the top scorer for every relegated Premier League team in the last 20 years. We start off down where you'd expect, with 4 players sharing the honour for the 2004-2005 Sunderland team. The infamous Derby squad of 07-08 follow up with 4 goals coming from their top scorer. Similarly underwhelming numbers continue, with 66% of teams being stuck in the single digits. By the time that we get to 13 goals, 53 of 57 of the teams that have been relegated got less than this from their lead men. However, we have to add on another 8 goals to that figure in order to reach Andy Johnson's tally for Crystal Palace in the 2004-2005 season, in which Crystal Palace got relegated on one of the most memorable final day relegation battles in Premier League history. How did this remarkable goal scoring season happen for a player as unlikely as Johnson, and how did Palace manage to still get relegated despite all those goals? Andy Johnson started his career at Birmingham, where he had done well to carve out a role for himself in the squad, but had failed to post any real notable scoring numbers. His best season to that point had been him scoring 4 goals in 34 league appearances. He'd also scored 3 goals in a very successful League Cup run, which ultimately ended badly for both Birmingham and Johnson, as he missed the crucial penalty in the final against Liverpool. He'd scored 8 goals in over 80 league appearances as he was dealt off to Crystal Palace, along with £4.25 million as part of a swap deal to sign Clinton Morrison. Ironically, Clinton Morrison would end up returning to Palace at a much cheaper price later on to come and play with Johnson, citing a desire to play with Andrew Johnson as one of his main reasons for re-signing with the club. His historic Premier League season began with a goal in the very first game against Norwich City, showcasing a trademark finish, sliding the ball coolly past an onrushing Robert Green. He did score 27 league goals the previous year in the second tier, leading the division's scoring charts as he helped lead Palace to promotion through the playoffs. But nobody could have expected his success to translate so well to the improved competition of the Premier League. The goals would continue to flow throughout the season as Johnson was incredibly consistent. You might expect a hat-trick somewhere along the way, or a tendency to stack up the goals against weaker teams, but his strikes were fairly evenly spread out across the season, although he did manage to get blanked by teams such as Jussi Jääskeläinen's Bolton or Jose Mourinho's Chelsea twice. His longest scoring drought was a span of 4 games, as Andy Johnson managed to score a goal in 19 different games this season. So how did Crystal Palace manage to have a man score 21 goals and still get relegated? Well, to put it simply, there were very few other contributors throughout the season. The next top scorer for Palace was Aki Riihiläinen with 4, making the difference of 17 goals between the top scorer and second scorer easily the biggest out of any relegated teams. That holds even when you take it as a percentage of team goals scored, as Johnson accounted for 51% of his team's goals scored that year. He was the only player above 50%, beating out 2014-15 Charlie Austin and 2021-2022 Teemu Pukki. In fact, by raw numbers, despite having the top scorer in a season by such a distance, the 2004-2005 Palace team were only 16th in terms of total goals scored by relegated teams. This leaves them behind teams such as 2007-2008's Birmingham City, whose top scorer Michael Forsell only found the back of the net 9 times. There's some especially nice goals here, managing to float this header past Casey Keller, Southampton's Antti Niemi replacement, and then swivelling on a beautiful half volley to beat Tottenham's Paul Robinson from long range. Both attempts securing vital points for the Eagles. I'm letting most of the goals just play out in the background, but I do have to stop and draw attention to this one. I've seen all the recent talk about prime Barclaysman. I'm not a massive fan of the term. After all, most of the talk around it is pure nostalgia bait nonsense. But it's hard not to say that I've found the leading contender for the most prime Barclays goal of all time in doing my research for this video. We start out with the absolute legend that is Gabor Kiraly in his trackie. The only way things could start out better is if he was wearing a little cap to keep the sun out of his eyes. Next, he launches this absolute piss missile up into the skies near Birmingham. The ball then bounces for the first time just outside the opposition's box, with the defender under the ball taking evasive action. Hill claimed that he thought the ball was going through to his goalkeeper, but I wouldn't blame him if he was just avoiding decapitation. The ball doesn't bounce again until it has crossed the line. 2 touches, 1 bounce to go 100 yards and score a goal, earning a cool 3 points for Gabor Kiraly in the fantasy team that year. Now, if you've been paying attention to the goals going in so far, then I'm sure you've noticed something. There does seem to be a lot of penalties, doesn't there? Well, you're not necessarily wrong, as alongside being the only person to ever score 20 goals and get relegated in the Premier League, this season also makes history for being the most penalties scored in a single season. Now, before I hear all of you trendy folks from the tweeters and the YouTubes coming over here with your 2025 lingo, screaming Pandrew Ponson, he's washed dunk, Skibby Rizzler, I would like to note that he did win 6 of the 11 penalties that he scored this season, basically all by himself. So if you really wanted to be harsh and deduct him 5 goals for them being gifted to him, which I mean you still have to score the penalties, he'd still comfortably be in second place behind Charlie Austin's 2014-15 season, in which unsurprisingly Charlie Austin scored multiple penalties. Does it make it less impressive that so many of these goals were scored as penalties? Perhaps, but it is still a remarkable accomplishment. This goal, where Johnson beats out Liverpool's Sami Hyypiä to the header in order to secure a winner, looked like it had set Palace on the right path to survival, finally out of the relegation zone with only 3 games left in the season. They'd been able to overcome a slow start, and this surprise win had broken a run of late season struggles. 3 scrappy draws on the bounce were not quite enough to survive, as they finished 1 point from safety. West Brom were on fire late in the season. They strung together a couple of impressive wins, beating Birmingham and overcoming a lone goal from Jonathan Johansson against Charlton. They then carried that momentum on to have arguably the most dramatic final day survival effort in Premier League history. When you look at the finishing position of teams with a player who scores 20 goals or more in a season, you'll see how a season like this should play out for a team. He's an outlier among outliers when ranked against other relegated teams. He'd scored more goals than 2 whole teams who'd been relegated in the past. He left Crystal Palace, who were unsuccessful in replacing him the second time around. They attempted to fill the gap with James Snowcroft, who only scored 5 in his first season in the Championship, and Shefki Kuki, the man with one of the best celebrations of all time, who only managed 7. Shefki constantly clashed with management in his time at the club. He was fined for making disputed offensive gestures to the fans, before being transfer listed for that incident, along with his weight gain and lack of fitness. Johnson meanwhile went to Everton, before spending his last years in the Premier League with a successful Fulham side, as he joined in July of 2008, as another striker was on his way out of the club on a free transfer in Jari Litmanen. All of my Finnish viewers, if they exist, are now screaming at their phone screens and their computer monitors, going, "He's got to be doing this on purpose," or as I should say, Hänen teidän tehdä tämä tarkoituksella, or whatever this is meant to say.
Hänen täytyy tehdä tämä tarkoituksella.
And you're right, I was. If you're Finnish and you're watching this, you can comment down below and claim your prize. It's the least I can do for messing with you for 10 minutes. Who's your favourite Finnish ex-Premier League player? I'm a Teemu Pukki man myself. Andy Johnson sadly did not win the Golden Boot this season, with it going to Thierry Henry, but he still made history as the only player to score 20 or more goals and still get relegated in a Premier League season. As for the question of whether anybody has ever won the Golden Boot in their league and been relegated, I turn to much smarter people than me, writing for The Guardian, who say it has happened in the 73-74 Division 1 season, with the beautifully named Mick Channon for Southampton. Big up Mick. Big Mickey Chan. Big Mickey. Along with it happening a handful of other times across Europe's other top leagues. We'll see if a Spurs player can find his way onto this list this season.